Hey there, friend. Come a little closer to the fire with me. Let the room be small tonight, and safe, and dim, as if the world has politely stepped back to give us space. Because the truth I want to share with you is a dark one, softened at the edges like an old photograph. A story that begins with death already in the doorway, and ends with a kind of immortality that does not breathe, but still somehow endures. In the first minutes, you will hear about a baby so premature, his own mother would later say he could fit inside a quart pot. You will hear about a country splitting itself in two, brother against brother, while plague moved like a slow shadow between villages. You will hear whispers of witches and omens and comets, and the way fear makes people see patterns in smoke. And you will hear about a father who was gone before his son ever opened his eyes. A life starting with an empty space that never quite fills. If you like these gentle journeys into history's darker corners, please tap like and subscribe. It tells the channel you want more quiet stories like this, and it helps me keep the candlelit room warm. And if you feel like it, leave a small comment about where you are listening from tonight. I always imagine those places as little lights across a wide sleeping world. Now, settle your shoulders. Let your jaw unclench as if you have been holding it up all day without noticing. Take a slow breath in through your nose and let it go as if you are sighing out dust. Another breath, softer. Good. If you were standing here with me, you would notice the old wood popping in the hearth. Not loudly, just enough to remind you that time is passing. A thin ribbon of candle smoke curls upward and disappears. And beyond the walls, somewhere, the night does what it always does. It gathers the sounds of distant things and makes them small. We are going back to England, but not the England of postcards and bright museums. This is 17th century England, a land of damp stone and narrow lanes, of sermons and suspicion, of winter breath rising from people's mouths like pale ghosts. In 1642, the nation is tearing itself apart. King Charles I is at war with Parliament. It is the kind of conflict where truth changes depending on which road you walk, and neighbors begin to look at each other as if they are reading hidden messages in familiar faces. Some homes keep their shutters tight even at noon. Some churches are full, not of comfort, but of anxiety, as if prayer is a rope and everyone is gripping it too hard. And all the while, sickness returns in waves. Plague is not an abstract word here. It is a knock at the door that nobody wants to answer. It is a hush in a household when the wrong cough begins. It is the sharp smell of lye and the quiet arguments about whether to flee or stay. People talk about witches because witches are easier than randomness. They talk about comets because comets can be blamed. They talk about doom because doom feels like a shape you can hold in your hands. Into this world, on Christmas Day of 1642, in a small farmhouse in the countryside of Lincolnshire, a child draws his first breath. The farmhouse is modest, built of stone, practical rather than pretty, with a hearth that must be fed constantly to keep the cold from settling into bones. Outside, the earth is hard with winter. Inside, the air is warmed by animal heat and human worry. A woman named Hannah is there, exhausted and alone in the most particular way a person can be alone, because the man who should be beside her is already gone. Isaac Newton's father, also named Isaac, has been dead for 3 months. An illiterate farmer, people would later say, not poor, but not wealthy either. Land enough to survive, not enough to boast about. A life that smelled of soil and hay, of damp boots and stored grain. And now that life has ended, leaving behind a house, a few fields, and a widow holding an impossible little infant. The midwives look down at the child and make the kind of judgments people make when they are trying to protect their own hearts. They decide not to hope too hard. They decide he will not last. He is so small they say he could fit in a quart pot. a detail that sounds almost like a myth, and yet it is the sort of fact that clings to a family story because everyone needs a way to describe the shock of it. A baby like a handful of fragile warmth, a baby more quiet than babies are supposed to be, a baby who seems to belong more to the air than to the earth. Honestly, I've always found it strange how quickly adults decide what a life will be, how fast they place a little label on a newborn, as if the future can be folded up and put in a drawer. But in that farmhouse, with war in the distance and plague in people's conversations, it is understandable. They have seen too many small graves. They have heard too many prayers that did not change anything. So Hannah keeps him close. She cups him in her hands as if her palms are a cradle that might teach him how to stay. She feeds him and watches him and listens. There's a particular kind of listening that happens around a fragile child. Every tiny sound matters. A sigh, a swallow, the faintest complaint. Even silence can feel loud. Night after night, the fire must be tended. The wind presses at the stones. Somewhere, perhaps, a distant bell marks time. But inside the farmhouse, time is measured by breathing, by the slow turning of a head, by the small rise and fall of cloth over a chest. And in the corner of the room, the absence of the father is like a shadow that does not move, a hat that will never be worn again, a chair that holds nothing, a name repeated, then swallowed. 3 years pass in this way, and the child does not become an obvious prodigy. He does not glow. He is not charming in the way stories like to pretend. He is weak, often sickly. He is quiet. He is there, and that is enough. The countryside teaches patience. The seasons do not hurry. The fields do not care who is brilliant. They only care who is alive to work them. Yet the bond between Hannah and her son forms in those years, not loud, not sweet in a simple way, but strong. It is the bond of someone who has survived together. And bonds like that can feel like fate, until fate changes its mind. When Isaac is 3, Hannah remarries. The man is Barnabas Smith, a wealthy rector, much older than her. The marriage is practical, perhaps even necessary. A woman alone in that era does not have many choices that are safe, and still, it comes with a condition that will echo through Newton's life like a cold draft under a door. Barnabas will not have the boy in his house. Just like that, the farmhouse that had been a small universe of mother and child becomes a place of departure. The boy is left behind with his maternal grandmother, Marjorie Askoff. Hannah moves away to start a new household, a new life, a new set of daily sounds, and the child watches her go. Try to imagine it slowly, not as a dramatic scene with shouting or thunder, more like a quiet morning, thin light on the yard, a bundle of belongings, a skirt brushing against a doorway, a pause where a mother's hand might linger on a child's hair, or might not, a cart creaking, footsteps on packed earth, the sound of wheels turning away, and then the softest kind of catastrophe, the kind that does not make headlines, the kind that makes a person's inner world rearrange itself without warning. Isaac is too young to explain what is happening. But children don't need explanations to feel the shape of loss. They feel it in routine. They feel it in the way the house sounds different when one voice is missing. They feel it in the way food tastes, when a familiar hand is no longer the one setting it down. They feel it in the way night seems larger. His grandmother does what she can. She is elderly, managing a farm, raising a difficult little boy whose anger has nowhere to go, and whose questions do not have easy answers. She has her own aches, her own tiredness, her own chores that must be done no matter what anyone feels. The day begins with cold water, with the scrape of a bucket, with the smell of bread, with the steady work of keeping animals alive. And somewhere within that work, she tries to give the boy a place to stand. He begins to grow stronger, not suddenly, just season by season. The body learns. The lungs widen, the bones lengthen. And with that physical growth comes something else, something quieter but sharper. A kind of attention, a need to understand the world so completely that it cannot leave him. You know that feeling when you cannot control what happens to you, so you control what you can? A child cannot keep a mother from leaving, but a child can watch how a shadow falls across a wall. A child can listen for patterns. A child can build a small, dependable universe out of gears and wood and measured lines. In the dim rooms of that farm, among dust and straw, Isaac begins to make things. A little windmill, delicate and precise. A water clock that marks time with patient dripping. A sundial carved with careful lines. These are not toys, not really. They are attempts. They are a mind reaching outward, trying to find laws that do not change their minds. And still, in quiet moments, the wound is there. It sits behind his ribs like a small stone. It does not shout. It waits. We will linger with that stone. We will listen to the farmhouse at night, to the distant world at war, to the soft breath of a boy who is learning to be alone. And when the fire settles into coals, when the candle burns lower, we will follow him into the years where that loneliness becomes a kind of fuel, a slow, steady flame that does not flicker in wind. Sometimes, the farmhouse feels like a little island in a sea of wider trouble. News arrives slowly, carried on boots and market gossip. A neighbor mentions a battle far away. A traveler speaks of a town where sickness took more people than the ground could politely hold. And in the evenings, when the work is finally done, adults lower their voices, as if the walls themselves might be listening. Isaac listens too. He sits near the hearth where heat is strongest, watching the way sparks rise and vanish. He learns that the world is full of things that disappear. The sound of a cart on a road, the warmth of a hand, a bright line of fire that becomes ash, even daylight, gone each night, as if it never existed. When sense is hard to find, he turns to numbers. Not the grand numbers of kings and armies, but the humble ones. 1 nail, 2 boards, 3 turns of a hand crank, the count of steps from the door to the barn. Numbers are quiet companions. They do not leave. At 7, he begins to write small, serious lists, as if someone unseen is keeping score. He writes down his sins, and among them sits one line that still makes the candlelight feel colder when you read it. A threat, written by a child, about burning his mother and stepfather and the house over them. It is not the writing of a monster. It is the writing of a hurt boy with no language for abandonment except fire. And he does not act on it. The paper holds the heat for him. The ink becomes a place to pour the darkness without letting it spill into the room. Even his anger becomes a kind of control, and control, for him, becomes a kind of shelter. So the years move on. His hands become more certain. His thoughts stretch further. And somewhere beyond the fields, his mother is living a life that does not include him. Isaac cannot know the details, but he senses the shape of it. He senses that he has been left behind. In time, death will come again. The stepfather will die. The mother will return. The household will be rearranged once more, like furniture moved in the dark. But we are not rushing. Tonight, we let the fire burn low. We let the boy's breathing slow. We let the past settle around us like soft dust. And we listen for the next footstep, the one that will change everything again. There is a moment I like to imagine, though no one wrote it down. A late afternoon when the light is thin and gold, and the air smells of cold earth and old wood. Isaac kneels in the dirt, with a few scraps laid out like treasures. A piece of cloth, a splintered board, a peg he has stolen from a broken gate. His fingers are smudged with soot, and he keeps rubbing them together, as if he can feel time itself between the ridges of his skin. He sets the little windmill upright. He breathes on it, gently, and the blades turn, slow at first, then steadier. Such a small thing, and yet it moves when he asks it to move. It obeys. The world rarely obeys. So he watches, calm and hungry at the same time, as if the turning is a promise he can carry back into the night. The next footstep arrives years later, but it still sounds the same, a change you can feel before you understand it. A messenger at the gate, a neighbor calling out, a shift in the way adults speak, suddenly careful, suddenly busy. Barnabas Smith is dead. It is a simple fact, heavy as a stone. And it means Hannah returns to Woolsthorpe with 3 new children. Half-siblings Isaac has never learned to love, because love is not a switch you flip. It is something that grows, or refuses to. Try to picture that homecoming. The cart creaks into the yard. Wheels cut shallow lines into the earth. There is the smell of travel, of damp wool, of tired horses. Hannah steps down, older than the memory he has carried, her face both familiar and strange. A mother, yes, but also a stranger who belongs to another life. Isaac stands still. He is 10 now, thin and watchful. He does not run into her arms, not like the children in gentler stories. He feels the old ache rise, and with it something else. A stiff pride, like a collar pulled too tight. You know that feeling, maybe, when you want to be held but you cannot risk needing it. So you stand back and let the moment pass as if it is nothing. The new children cling to Hannah. They have had her in ways he never did. Their voices fill the house. Their small hands reach for bread, for attention, for comfort. And Isaac learns a new lesson about absence. Sometimes a person returns, and still the space remains. The household becomes crowded. Beds are shared. Chores multiply. The air smells of milk, damp clothes, and the steady animal warmth of too many bodies in one place. Isaac finds corners. A stool near the window. A patch of shade beside the barn. A thin strip of quiet beside the hearth. After everyone has fallen asleep, he keeps building things, as if building is a way of speaking without words. Hannah is practical. She has survived widowhood, remarriage, and widowhood again. She expects survival to look like work. She looks at her eldest son and sees land, livestock, fences, accounts. She wants him to be a farmer, like his father was. It makes sense. The farm needs hands. The family needs security. Dreams do not keep roofs from leaking. So, at 12, she pulls Isaac from school and sets him back into the old rhythm of rural life. There is the smell of sheep, the weight of a pail, the sting of cold mud seeping through a boot, the long, slow hours where nothing happens except weather, and he is supposed to watch the fields with a steady eye, to learn the language of soil and seasons. But the boy's mind drifts away like smoke. He reads when he should be mending. He sketches devices when he should be counting lambs. He leans against a fence and watches clouds, as if the sky is writing something only he can see. It is not laziness. It is misfit. A tool built for one task being forced into another. His mother grows frustrated. Frustration can be quiet, like a pot set down a little too hard. It can be a sharp word spoken once, then swallowed. And for Isaac, each small correction lands on top of the old wound. He does not soften. He tightens. He becomes more alone inside himself. It might have ended there. A strange boy wasted on a farm, his sharpness dulled by routine. But there is another adult in this story, and sometimes one person's noticing is the difference between a life folding shut and a life opening. Hannah's brother, William Askoff, has been to Cambridge. He recognizes the shape of Isaac's mind, the way a musician recognizes rhythm. He watches the boy build contraptions from scraps, watches him lose hours to books, watches him stare at problems like they are doors that must be opened. And he tells Hannah, gently but firmly, that this is not a farm boy, not truly. Keeping him here would be like keeping a hawk in a low shed and calling it safe. So Isaac is sent back to school. 14 now, he goes to the King's School in Grantham, and he goes with a kind of hunger that surprises even him. The town feels different from the farm. Streets are tighter. Voices echo off brick. There is the smell of ink, of worn leather, of chalk dust in the air. His footsteps sound sharper on packed ground, as if the world is paying attention. He studies with intensity, Latin and Greek, Euclid, the old texts that most students tolerate, he devours. And in the quiet hours, he returns to what his hands love. Models of machines, careful drawings, little proofs made of wood and string. His teachers notice. A headmaster, Henry Stokes, sees what the others miss, a mind that can hold still, and then suddenly leap. In 1661, Isaac goes to Trinity College, Cambridge, 18 years old, not rich, not polished. He enters as a sub-Caesar, the lowest category, serving wealthier students in exchange for education. Imagine it with me, slowly. Stone corridors cool to the touch, the smell of damp mortar, candles guttering in drafts, voices in Latin, bouncing off high ceilings, and a young man carrying a few books, a few worn clothes, and a private determination sharp enough to cut. He cleans rooms, he carries dishes, he endures condescension. Sometimes humiliation is loud, sometimes it is a look that slides over you, as if you are furniture. This life reinforces everything his childhood taught him. You are on your own. If you want dignity, you will have to build it. So he builds it in the only place he trusts, inside his mind. While other students drink and argue and laugh, Isaac reads, not just what he is told to read. He reads what is dangerous. He reads René Descartes, who suggests the universe might be a machine, obeying mathematical laws. He reads Galileo, who dared to point a telescope at the heavens and claim the earth is not the center of everything. He reads as if books are lanterns and he is walking alone through a dark field. The official curriculum clings to Aristotle. Heavy objects fall faster than light ones, the old voice says. The earth sits still at the center, the old voice insists. Motion needs constant pushing, the old voice repeats. And Isaac, quiet in his seat, begins to feel the cracks in that old stone. He asks himself why. Not out loud at first. Inside. Why do things fall? Why do planets wander? Why does the moon not simply drift away into the black? Some nights he works until the candle is nothing but a puddle of wax and a thin thread of smoke. He forgets food. He forgets sleep. Not because he is trying to be heroic, but because his attention locks onto a problem and refuses to let go. You know that feeling when your thoughts circle and circle and the rest of life becomes distant. For him, it is not anxiety, it is pursuit. By his second year, he is digging into new mathematics, the kind that is beginning to change Europe. Methods that can handle curves, change, motion. He sees, faintly, the possibility that nature might be written in numbers the way music is written in notes. The idea is intoxicating and quietly terrifying, because if the universe is mathematical, then the mind that can master mathematics might touch something close to the mind of God. He keeps notebooks, pages dense with symbols, diagrams, lines that look like small fences holding back a wild thought. He is teaching himself beyond the level of his tutors, and still, he does not share much. Secrecy is a habit now, a protective skin, outside the college walls. England continues to ache. Civil unrest does not vanish just because scholars debate. Plague returns in whispers. People still read omens into comets. The world remains unstable, and perhaps that instability, in its strange way, feeds him. When everything outside is uncertain, he turns inward, toward laws that might be firm. In 1664, his mind truly begins to show its teeth. He encounters the work of continental mathematicians and pushes past them, not out of arrogance, but out of sheer need. He scribbles through nights. He stares at curves until they feel like living things. He begins to create tools that do not yet have names, methods that later generations will call calculus. But to him, they are simply fluxions, quantities in motion, a way to hold change still long enough to look at it. He is on the edge of something vast, and then, as if the universe enjoys irony, the world sends him back to the place he began. In the summer of 1665, reports reach Cambridge of a terrible plague spreading through London. The air in the college seems to shift. More coughing, more absences, more closed doors. Authorities decide the safest thing is to close the university. Students are sent away, scattered like ash. Isaac packs his few things, books, instruments, not much else, and he walks out of Cambridge, past stone and shadow, past the familiar corners where his thoughts have sharpened. The road ahead is long and quiet. His footsteps fall into dust. The sky is pale, and behind him, the old world is shutting its gates, not to keep him out, but to keep death from coming in. He returns to Woolsthorpe, to the same farmhouse, the same fields, the same breath of the countryside. But he is not the same boy who was left behind. He carries a storm of ideas. He carries a mind that has found its hunger, and in the forced solitude that waits for him, the darkest shadow of the age will accidentally make room for light. We can almost feel it already, can't we? The hush of empty roads, the stillness of a room where no one interrupts, a window waiting for sunlight, a prism waiting in a hand, an apple tree waiting in the garden. So take another slow breath. Let your eyelids grow heavier if they want to. The plague is outside, distant and real, but here by the fire everything is quiet. And in that quiet, Isaac Newton is about to enter the years that will change everything, without even knowing the name of what he is becoming. The first weeks at Trinity have a particular chill, not only the chill of stone, but the chill of hierarchy. He learns which staircases belong to which men, which doors he should not open, which voices will pretend not to hear him. He carries bowls and plates through corridors where tapestries hang heavy with dust. He rinses cups in cold water until his fingers ache. At night, when the richer students have gone loud with drink, he returns to his small space and closes the door on their laughter. The latch clicks, silence pools, and in that silence he feels, again, the old childhood lesson. If you want something steady, you must make it yourself. So he opens a book. The paper smells faintly of age and smoke. Candlelight trembles over Latin lines. Outside, wind moves through bare branches, and the college seems to breathe in its sleep. He reads until his eyes sting, then reads a little more, because the page does not abandon him. Sometimes he pauses and rubs his temples, not from pain, but from the pressure of thought. He imagines an apple dropping into grass. He imagines the moon hanging above the chapel roof. He tries to feel the invisible thread between them. No one has taught him this thread. It arrives as a quiet suspicion, like the scent of rain before the first drop. He does not know yet that this suspicion will one day harden into law. For now it is only a private murmur in the mind of a young man who has learned to keep his most important things hidden. On the road home, the world feels emptied. People step aside as if distance itself is medicine. At inns, voices are muted, and the smell of vinegar hangs in the air because someone has decided vinegar can chase sickness away. Isaac walks with his cloak drawn close, a small bag bumping at his hip, heavy with paper and possibility. When Woolsthorpe appears, it is just stone and sky, and the familiar angle of the roof. Inside, he claims a room. He sets his books down carefully, one by one. He He wipes a patch of dust from the table with his sleeve and watches the dust rise, float, and settle again, patient as snowfall. He begins to arrange his days by questions. Morning, he reads. Afternoon, he calculates. Evening, he stares at a problem until it either opens or refuses. Time becomes soft around him. Outside his window, old certainties are already cracking. Galileo has disturbed the old rules of falling. Kepler has found ellipses where perfect circles were expected. The heavens are no longer smooth and unquestioned. They are strange and lawful and waiting. Soon he will lift a prism to a beam of sunlight. Soon he will look at an apple tree with different eyes. But for now, the miracle is simpler. A young man alone in a quiet room, a candle, a page, and the countryside, breathing steadily in the dark while history shudders at the edges. And so we drift toward those sealed years of plague, when the world outside narrows and his inner world expands. If your breathing is slow now, let it stay slow. Let the fire in your imagination dim to coals. The next pages will be quiet and full of turning. Just a little longer, and you will hear the universe begin to answer him. Tonight, let us stay with him in that farmhouse, when the world is frightened and therefore strangely quiet. The roads are less busy, the markets thin out. People keep their distance, as if distance could be folded like cloth and worn as protection. And in the middle of it all, Isaac Newton is back where his life began, in rooms that smell of stone, wood smoke, and old grain. If you were standing here with me, you would hear the house settling. A beam creaks once, then goes still. Somewhere in the yard, an animal shifts in its sleep, a soft scrape of hoof against earth. The wind worries at the edges of the window, and the glass answers with a faint, patient rattle. Newton takes this silence seriously, not like a vacation, more like a condition that can be used. If you are careful, he does not celebrate plague. Of course, no one with a heart can celebrate it, but he senses what it has done to time. It has stretched time. It has made long, uninterrupted hours, and those hours are the rarest treasure for the kind of mind he has. He chooses a room, small and plain, perhaps his childhood bedroom. The bed is simple. The table is scarred from years of use. The walls are close enough that candlelight can reach them, so when he lifts the flame, the whole space warms into being. He places his books down in a stack and rests his hand on them for a moment, as if he is steadying himself against a ship's railing. Then he begins, slowly, with habits that look ordinary from the outside. A page turned, a nib dipped into ink, a line drawn, then erased, then drawn again. And yet beneath those small motions, a strange hunger is working. You can feel it even now, in the quiet. It is the hunger to find what does not change. Outside, the age is full of things that change abruptly. A king loses ground, a general gains it, a town closes its gates, a household goes silent. But inside Newton's room, the questions remain, and the questions are steady. He has carried Cambridge back with him, not the stone buildings, but the arguments and uncertainties. Aristotle's old certainties have begun to crumble, but nothing solid has replaced them. Galileo showed that bodies fall together, but why do they fall? Kepler traced the heavens into ellipses, but why should ellipses rule the sky? Descartes imagined vortices of invisible matter, but vortices feel like a story, told to soothe discomfort, not an answer proved with care. Newton sits at the table and lets all of this gather around him like cold air. Then he begins to warm it with attention. The first great knot in his mind is a mathematical one. It is about curves, about areas beneath curves. The way a field has boundaries that look smooth from afar and jagged up close. Mathematicians have been wrestling with this for centuries, trying to measure what refuses to be measured cleanly. You can approximate, of course. You can stack rectangles under a curve, thin and thinner, like little wooden slats laid side by side. You can count and add and hope you are close enough. But Newton is not satisfied with close enough. He has never been satisfied with close enough. That trait that made him difficult as a child, that tightness in him, becomes a kind of tool here. He wants exactness. Not for pride, not even for glory, for quiet. Because exactness feels like a door that clicks shut, like a latch that holds. He begins to imagine quantities that are not simply numbers, but flowing numbers. He thinks of motion, not as a series of jumps, but as a continuous drift. He looks at a curve and imagines it not as a shape frozen on paper, but as something being drawn, moment by moment, by a moving point, a point that slides, a point that breathes, a point that leaves a path behind it, the way a snail leaves a silver line. In that imagining, something shifts. He sees that to understand the whole curve, you might understand the tiniest change, and then gather those changes like grains of sand until they become a dune. He writes. He scratches through proof after proof. Sometimes he stands and paces, not quickly, but with measured steps, heel to toe on the floorboards. The boards answer him with little sighs. He returns to the table. He leans close to the candlelight, squinting. His breath fogs the cooler air near the window. A drop of wax slides down the candle like a slow tear. Days pass like this. He forgets meals, not in a dramatic way. Food is simply there, and then suddenly, not there, pushed aside by the force of thought. His mother might call him. He might answer, distracted, with a sound that means yes, but does not contain attention. Sometimes she finds his plate untouched later, the bread dry, the broth cooled to a skin. In these weeks, he invents what later generations will call calculus. He calls parts of it fluxions, because in his mind, things are always flowing. But he does not announce it. He does not even speak it aloud, as if naming it would invite intruders. There is a mood to this discovery, and it is not triumphant. It is hushed. It is like hearing a distant bell through fog and realizing, suddenly, you know which church it comes from. A new clarity arrives, and with it a stillness. He uses this new tool carefully, like someone handling a blade. He tests it on problems. He watches it cut cleanly, where older methods tore and frayed. He feels a kind of relief that is almost physical, like unclenching a fist that has been tight for years. And then, when the math has begun to settle into him, another question rises. Light. He has a prism, purchased at a fair in Cambridge. It is small enough to fit in the palm, cool and heavy, a little wedge of glass that looks harmless. On an afternoon when the sky is pale and winter light enters the room at an angle, he decides to play with it. He makes the room darker. This is important. He closes a shutter. He covers a crack where light sneaks in. He leaves only a narrow beam, like a thread, slipping through. Dust floats in the beam, tiny drifting flecks that make the air look alive. You can almost hear the dust, if you listen hard enough, like a soft hiss of countless small falls. He holds the prism in the beam, and the world changes on the wall. A spectrum blooms, not a vague wash, but a clear band of colors, arranged like a secret order. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. The colors lie there calmly, as if they have always been waiting to be seen. The accepted wisdom of his day says, white light is pure, and colors are impurities, as if color is a stain, as if it is damage. But the wall suggests something else. The wall suggests white light is not simple at all. It is a crowd, a mixture, a quiet gathering of different things. Newton feels a small chill of excitement. He is careful with it, because excitement can be sloppy. So he slows down. He repeats. He changes the angle. He measures with string. He marks the wall with pencil. little dots, like stars in a private sky. He takes a second prism and tries to recombine the colors, and when they fold back into white, the idea settles deeper. The prism is not creating colors, it is separating them, like a sieve, like a careful hand sorting grains. He isolates one color, red, and passes it through another prism. Red stays red, blue stays blue. No matter how he turns the glass, no amount of refraction turns red into green or green into violet. The colors are stubborn. They are themselves. They are properties of light, not smudges on light. There is something strangely comforting about that. Even color, which feels emotional and subjective, can be treated as a stable thing. The universe can be described. It can be sorted. It can be understood. As he works, the farmhouse becomes a kind of laboratory, but not a noisy one. There are no assistants bustling about, no grand instruments. Only a man, a beam of sunlight, a shard of glass, and the patience to watch. Sometimes, late in the day, he looks up and sees the spectrum fading as the sun lowers. He watches it dim, and he feels the tenderness of time. The colors are there, then gone, like so many things, but the knowledge remains. It settles into his notebook in ink, where it will not fade. He begins to think about the eye, about perception, about how a telescope fails when it tries to gather light through lenses, and light refuses to bend the same way for every color. Chromatic aberration, he will call it later, but now it is simply a stubborn blur. He realizes the blur is not a flaw of the craftsman. It is a law of nature, and this realization, too, has the dark sweetness of inevitability. It means something cannot be fixed by trying harder. It must be approached differently. This is a lesson he learned as a child in another form. You cannot make a mother stay by wanting it. You cannot make the world gentle by asking. You must change the method. So the thought of mirrors, of reflecting telescopes, begins to form, slow as a seed in soil, and all the while, beyond the windows, plague continues. People die in other towns. Letters carry news like ash. The countryside tries to remain itself, but it is tense. The air feels watchful. A cough in the distance becomes a rumor. A closed gate becomes a warning. Newton hears the fear, but he does not let it take him. He returns to his room. He returns to the candle. He returns to the narrow beam of light and the band of colors. He returns to the curve on paper, to the flowing quantities, to the soft clicking of ideas aligning. And in the garden, outside, an apple tree stands quietly, its branches moving just slightly in the wind. It is not waiting to be famous. It is only being a tree, but it is part of the same world he is learning to read. Soon, he will sit beneath it. Soon, he will watch a simple fall and feel the universe tilt into a new shape. But tonight, we let the prism rest in his hand a little longer. We let the colors glow softly on the wall. We let the fear of the age stay outside the shutters. Breathe in and out. Let the colors blur gently behind your eyelids. Not bright, not sharp, but soothing. And as you drift, remember this. Even in a year of plague, even in a country at war, a quiet room can hold a kind of order. And that order is about to widen into the sky. There are nights when the candle burns low and he still does not stop. The flame shortens, the wick curls, and the light changes from steady to slightly wavering, making the shadows breathe on the plaster. His hand cramps. He rolls his fingers, slowly, listening to the small clicks in his joints. He dips the nib again. Ink has a smell, if you are close enough, sharp and metallic, mixed with the faint sweetness of paper sizing. It is an intimate smell, like secrets. Sometimes the wind carries damp air from the fields, and the room tastes of rain before the rain arrives. Then the first drops touch the roof, and the sound becomes a soft drumming that seems to count time for him. One drop, another, a pause, then a gentle spill of water, as if the sky is exhaling. In those moments, he feels the world outside as a pressure, a vast thing pressing against the smallness of his room. And he does something that has always been strange about him. He narrows his focus until the vastness cannot enter. He makes a universe small enough to fit between his fingertips, a curve, a beam, a number that flows. Honestly, I have always found it strange how solitude can be both wound and medicine. For Newton, it is both. The abandonment of his childhood taught him to live alone, but it also taught him to fear what closeness might cost him. So he works in a way that protects him. He does not write to friends. He does not seek praise. He does not say, "Look what I found." He says, quietly, inside himself, "I must be certain. Certain is a wall. Certain is a locked door. Certain means no one can take it away." He returns to the table. He returns to the notebook that has become, in a way, his other skin. His calculations spread outward. He sketches curves and tangents. He tries to catch change itself. How fast is something changing at this exact instant? It sounds like a strange question, but it is the kind that can haunt you once you have tasted it. He cannot leave it alone. He takes the smallest slice of time he can imagine and looks at how a quantity shifts across it. He makes the slice smaller, smaller, still, until it is almost nothing, and yet it still matters. This is where some people would become dizzy. Infinity, nothingness, the edge where language becomes thin. But Newton seems to find calm there, at the brink, at the place where the mind must be precise or fall. And when he is tired, when the candle is a stub and the rain has moved on, he gathers his papers into neat piles. He smooths the creases with his palm. He hides them, not dramatically, just carefully, as if even the boards of the floor should not know too much, because secrets, to him, are safer than applause. Secrets cannot argue back. Secrets cannot mock you. Secrets cannot abandon you. If you listen closely, you can hear his quill laid down, a faint tap, then a longer stillness, the kind of stillness that is not empty, but full, full of equations not yet named, full of colors not yet explained to anyone, full of a mind preparing, quietly, for a question that will soon come walking in from the garden, light as a falling fruit. The garden at Woolsthorpe is not dramatic. It is a place of simple earth and simple weather, the kind of garden that does not know it is being watched by history. If you were standing there with me, you would smell damp soil and last season's leaves, a faint, sour sweetness rising as the sun warms the ground. The air would feel cool in your nostrils, and somewhere a bird would make a small, patient sound, then fall silent again. Newton steps outside when his mind begins to overheat, not because he is finished, but because the body asks for small mercies, a few minutes of wind on the face, a shift of focus, a different texture for the eyes. He walks slowly, hands clasped behind his back, boots pressing into soft grass. Each step leaves a slight imprint, a temporary mark that will fade by afternoon. The world is always doing this, he thinks, making marks and erasing them. The apple tree is there, branches slightly bowed. The trunk is rough. If you touched it, you would feel ridges under your fingertips, like old scars. A few apples remain, heavy and pale, hanging in a way that suggests patience. They do not hurry. Newton pauses beneath the branches. He looks up, not like a poet, but like a person trying to catch a rule in the act. And then, one apple lets go. No thunder, no omen, just a quiet fall through air. It drops, turns once, and lands with a soft, dull sound in the grass. Not even a sharp thud, more like the garden taking a slow breath. You know that feeling when something tiny happens? Something you have seen 1,000 times, and yet suddenly it feels as if you are seeing it for the first time? That is what happens inside him. The apple is ordinary, but the question is not, Why down? Why not sideways? Why not up? As if the earth were pushing things away instead of pulling them close. In the old explanations, the apple falls because it seeks its natural place, because heavy things belong at the center, because the heavens are different from the ground. But Newton has spent too many nights with curves and prisms to accept an answer that cannot be measured. He bends, slowly, and picks the apple up. It is cool, slightly damp from the air. There is a mark where it struck, a bruise beginning to darken. He turns it in his hand, thoughtful. He looks toward the distant line of trees. Beyond that line, beyond the clouds, the moon is there, even if it cannot be seen. And he lets himself wonder, very gently, like someone touching a sore place to see if it still hurts. Could the same pull that brought this apple down reach all the way to the moon? The idea is daring, but it is also strangely calming, because it suggests unity. Not a world split into separate realms, but one world, one set of rules, one breath moving through all things. He returns to the house with the apple in his hand, as if carrying a small weight that is also a question. Back in his room, he writes. He begins with what he can estimate: distance to the moon, time of its orbit, the acceleration needed to keep it from drifting away. He is careful, 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 because this thought will sound like madness to most people of his age, and he cannot bear to be laughed at. Not again. Not after a childhood of being out of place. He considers an inverse square relationship, the way a force might weaken as you move away, spreading like light spreads, thinning as it travels. If gravity decreases with the square of distance, then perhaps the pull at the moon's height is just enough to curve its path, not enough to drop it like an apple, but enough to keep it circling. The mathematics begins to align, not perfectly at first. There are numbers he does not know precisely: the Earth's size, its exact shape, the moon's exact distance. In his notebooks, the uncertainty shows up as scratch marks and recalculations. It is debated how close his first results were. Some scholars argue he set the idea aside for a time because the available measurements did not satisfy his standards. We cannot be sure what happened in his mind on which exact day, but what matters is that the seed is planted, a seed that will not stop growing. And as it grows, it changes everything. If gravity reaches the moon, then it reaches farther still. It reaches planets, it reaches comets, it reaches tides, it reaches across empty space. Empty space. That phrase alone makes people uneasy, even now, because if space is empty, how does a pull travel through it? How does a thing touch another thing without contact? The thought can feel spooky, like a hand reaching from the dark. Newton feels that unease too. He does not laugh it off. He does not pretend it is simple. He only does what he trusts. He measures what can be measured. He describes what can be described. And for the rest, he remains cautious, holding the mystery at arm's length. The plague slowly loosens its grip. News arrives that the death toll is falling. The doors of Cambridge prepare to open again. The world, wounded and wary, begins to move. Newton has a choice: stay in the farmhouse and keep his discoveries in the warm dark of private notebooks, or return to the stone corridors of the university and place his ideas in the hands of other minds. He does not rush the decision. He sits by the hearth one evening, watching the fire. The flames make soft sounds as they eat the wood, and the orange light flickers across his pages. Outside, the wind pushes at the thatch, and a distant dog barks once, then stops as if reminded to be quiet. Honestly, I think he already knows he will go back, not because he loves company, because solitude, even when it is fruitful, can turn into a kind of locked room, and at some point, the door must open, even if only a crack. So in the spring of 1667, he packs, books wrapped in cloth, instruments tucked carefully away. Not many possessions, really. Mostly paper, mostly thought. The road to Cambridge is long enough for the body to feel it. His horse's gait is steady. Hooves beat a slow pattern into the dirt. Fields pass like pages turning. He watches the sky, pale and wide, and he feels that strange sensation of returning to a life that no longer fits. He is not the same young man who left, but he must pretend to be, at least at first. Cambridge receives him with stone and shadow. The colleges are ancient, cool even in summer. Footsteps echo in corridors that smell faintly of damp masonry and candle smoke. Latin murmurs in classrooms. Old arguments continue as if plague had been only a bad dream. Yet something has shifted. Death has visited the city, and it has made people less certain of their certainties. There is a small crack in the old authority, a thin opening. Newton slips through it. He attends lectures. He completes what is expected. He does not announce what he has done in the farmhouse. He carries his miracle years inside him like a hidden coal, warm but covered. Some tutors notice. They see how he solves problems too quickly, how his proofs have a strange elegance. When asked how, he becomes vague. He offers small explanations, never the full method. His old wound, the fear of being taken from, wakes easily. Isaac Barrow, the Lucasian professor of mathematics, becomes one of the few who truly sees him. Barrow is a man of learning, and also, importantly, a man who can recognize learning in others without feeling threatened. He examines Newton's work and feels the quiet shock of it. Here is a mind moving ahead of the age. Under Barrow's watch, Newton shifts from student to scholar. He earns his degree. Then, in 1669, Barrow resigns his chair, and something extraordinary happens. Newton, young and untested in the public eye, is appointed Lucasian professor. It sounds like a triumph, and in some ways it is. Security, prestige, a position that gives him room to work, but there is a darker edge to it as well. Responsibility, eyes on him, expectation. He stands in the lecture room and speaks, and the words come out in a way that makes sense to him, but not always to others. His mind moves too fast. He sees the whole pattern and forgets that other people must climb toward it step by step. The hall grows emptier over time. Students drift away, not from disrespect, but from exhaustion. And Newton, oddly, does not seem to notice, or perhaps he notices and cannot change. Teaching requires a kind of empathy, a willingness to slow down for someone else, and he has spent most of his life moving alone. So he returns, again and again, to what he can control. His papers, his experiments, his private quiet. His work on light returns with him to Cambridge. He refines it with better equipment. He thinks about that stubborn blur in telescopes, the way different colors refuse to focus together. And he makes a decision that will bring him, briefly, into public view. He builds a telescope that uses mirrors instead of lenses, a reflecting telescope. It is small, almost modest, only a few inches long, but it performs with startling clarity. He polishes the mirror. He adjusts the angle of the little flat mirror that sends light to the eyepiece. He holds it up to the night sky, and the stars look sharper, as if someone has cleaned a dusty window. Word travels. The Royal Society in London hears. They request to see it. Newton is not a man who loves journeys, but he sends the instrument, and when the fellows examine it, they are impressed. In 1672, they elect him a Fellow of the Royal Society. Here is the moment many people imagine as simple glory, a quiet genius recognized at last. A door opened, but the door opens onto a room full of voices. The society asks for the theory behind the telescope. To explain, Newton must speak about light, about color, about the prism, about the claim that white light is composite. He hesitates. He knows what it feels like to be challenged. He knows how quickly a question can become an insult. Still, he writes. He sends a letter in February 1672, careful and detailed, describing his experiments. And then the criticism arrives. Robert Hooke, an influential mind and a sharp one, challenges Newton's conclusions. Hooke suggests alternative explanations. He implies that Newton has misunderstood what he saw. The language is not gentle. Newton reads it and feels the old rage stir, the same heat that once made a boy write frightening words in a notebook. He answers defensively. He insists on his experiments. He demands understanding. The exchange becomes bitter. More voices join in, some from across Europe. Christian Huygens questions. Others raise philosophical concerns. Some object on theological grounds, uneasy with a universe that feels mechanical. And Newton, who can face the darkness of plague and the abyss of infinity, finds that he cannot face criticism with calm. It hurts him in a way that feels personal, because for him, ideas are not just ideas. They are his shelter. To attack them is to shake the walls. So he retreats, not completely, but enough. He shares less. He works more in private. The lesson he takes is quiet and bleak. Fame has teeth. Years pass. He does his duties. He calculates. He polishes. He keeps his greatest tools hidden, his methods for fluxions, his deeper mechanics, his growing thoughts about gravity. It is possible that without a certain visitor, those thoughts might have remained hidden much longer. In August 1684, Edmund Halley arrives in Cambridge. Halley is younger, energetic, a man who carries questions like bright coins in his pocket. He comes into Newton's rooms with a problem that has been troubling Europe. If a planet is pulled toward the sun with a force that decreases with the square of distance, what path will it follow? Newton's answer is quiet, almost casual, an ellipse. Halley is stunned. He asks for proof. Newton says he has done it before, years ago, and that he will find the calculation, or reconstruct it. You can feel the air change in that room. Not loud, just a shift, as if a long sealed book has been placed on the table, and someone has touched the clasp. Halley leaves with a promise. Newton is left with his papers, his candlelight, and the old familiar choice, hide or reveal. Tonight, as we sit by the fire, let that choice hover gently in the air. The candle smoke curls upward. Dust drifts in the lamplight. Outside, the world turns, steady and indifferent, while inside one room, a man prepares once more to write a law for the heavens. He does not sleep easily after Halley's visit, not because he is excited in a bright way, but because his mind has been touched where it is most alive. He sits at the table long after the house is quiet. The ink dries on the nib. The candle leans. Outside, the river of night moves past the windows, slow and cold. Somewhere far away, London breathes with its own restless sound, and the Royal Society waits, and the sky holds its patient mathematics. Newton listens to all of that without moving. Then he opens a notebook as if opening a door, and the first page catches the light. Halley does not bring thunder into Newton's rooms. He brings a question, and questions can be louder than storms. After the door closes behind him, the quiet returns in a different shape. The candlelight seems sharper. The air feels thinner, as if the room has been opened to a larger space. Newton sits with his hands resting on the edge of the table, fingertips touching wood that has been worn smooth by years of use. He listens to the little sounds that usually calm him. A faint crackle from the hearth, the slow, almost polite ticking of a clock somewhere in the house, a distant footstep in the corridor, then nothing. And still, the question remains. If the pull follows an inverse square, what curve does the planet trace? An ellipse, he said, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. Now he has to prove it again, or perhaps prove it in a way that can survive another mind's gaze. He goes to his papers, and you can imagine them like a small forest of sheets, some folded, some stacked, some scattered like fallen leaves. He lifts a pile and finds an older page underneath. He scans it. He frowns. He shifts the pile aside and looks again. It is not that he has forgotten. It is that his mind stores things in a way that is private even to himself. A proof can hide behind a later proof. A diagram can be buried beneath a calculation. A decade of thought can lie quiet and flat, waiting. When he cannot find what he wants, he does what he has always done when the world disappoints him. He rebuilds. He sharpens the quill. He lays out fresh paper. He measures a margin with the edge of a ruler, then draws a clean line. The ink is dark, almost bluish in the candlelight. He begins with first principles, slow as a hand lowering into cold water. Outside, winter breathes. Inside, the room becomes a narrow tunnel of attention. He writes of motion and force. He draws curves and chords. He lets geometry carry authority, because geometry is old enough to be respected, and he knows how quickly new methods can be attacked as trickery. His fluxions remain behind the curtain. He can feel them there, like a tool in his pocket. But he chooses the language of straight lines and circles, because circles have sat on the tables of scholars for centuries. The proof takes shape, not in one rush, but in careful layers, like dust settling. He shows that a central force that diminishes with the square of distance leads to an orbit that is a conic section, ellipse, parabola, hyperbola, shapes that seem simple when drawn and terrifying when you realize the sky is made of them. Halley receives the demonstration in November of 1684, a 9-page treatise, De Motu Corporum in Gerum, on the motion of bodies in orbit. Small in size, enormous in implication. Halley reads it and feels what few people get to feel in a lifetime. He is watching a mind take the heavens apart and put them back together with quiet hands. He returns to Cambridge and urges Newton to expand the work into a full book. He speaks quickly, with the eager warmth of someone who can see history leaning in. Newton listens, guarded. He remembers Hooke. He remembers the sharpness of public disagreement. He remembers the feeling of being misunderstood. But Halley is different. Halley is practical, too. He offers to manage the printing, the money, the letters, the endless small friction of publication. He offers, in other words, to build a wall between Newton and the parts of the world Newton cannot bear. The idea settles in Newton like a stone. He agrees, and then the writing begins. It is not the gentle writing of a man keeping a journal. It is the writing of a man trying to nail down the universe before it slips away. He works with a rhythm that would break most bodies, hours that start before the sun and continue long after the candles are guttering. He forgets meals again, as he did in the plague years. The servant brings food. The food cools. The servant returns later and finds it untouched, the bread stiff, the tea cold, the bowl wearing a thin skin. Sometimes Newton stands so long at the table that his legs tremble. He shifts his weight, slow and stiff. He rubs his temples with ink-stained fingers. His eyes burn. He blinks and sees after images of lines and circles, pale ghosts floating in the dark. If you were standing beside him, you would see how strangely calm he is while doing this. There is no frantic movement, only pressure. Pressure like deep water, the kind of pressure that holds everything still. He is building a work that will be called Philosophiae Naturalis Principia, Mathematica, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. A title that sounds formal and cold, but inside it, the world is alive. The first book lays the foundations. 3 laws of motion. They arrive like stones placed in the earth, one after the other. A body at rest stays at rest. A body in motion stays in motion, unless acted upon by an external force. It is simple, and it overturns something ancient. It says that nature does not need constant pushing. Nature is already moving. Force equals change of motion, the relationship between push and response. The idea that a steady force creates a steady change. For every action, an equal and opposite reaction. A symmetry that feels almost moral. A quiet balance, even in a violent world. Newton writes these laws with an odd tenderness, as if he is smoothing them into a form that can be carried by other hands. Then he builds around them. He shows how to analyze bodies moving under different forces. He draws diagrams that look like calm little worlds. In the second book, he turns to resisting media, air, water, fluids that slow motion. Here he does something that is both scientific and personal. He dismantles the Cartesian vortices, the swirling invisible sea that many believed carried the planets. Vortices had comfort. They made the cosmos feel like a machine with gears you could imagine. Newton's mathematics shows that such vortices cannot do the job. They would drag planets in ways that do not match observation. They would lose energy. They would tangle. He does not write this with cruelty, but the conclusion is firm. A door closes. A popular story about the heavens is quietly extinguished. Then comes the third book, the one that makes the air in the room feel different, as if the ceiling has lifted. Here he applies the laws to the real solar system. He speaks of universal gravitation, the idea that every particle of matter attracts every other particle, not with whispers, not with superstition, but with a force that can be measured, calculated, predicted. He brings the moon into the story, and the tides. The ocean's slow breathing becomes a consequence of attraction, not a mood of the gods. He explains the perturbations, those slight deviations in orbits that are like nervous ticks in the dance of planets. He shows they come from planets tugging on one another, a quiet crowd of pulls. He makes predictions. Earth should be slightly flattened at the poles because it spins. A subtle shape change, like a body altered by a long habit. And he turns to a comet, the one Halley watched. He calculates that it will return, not as a miracle, but as a schedule. Approximately 76 years. Not exact, perhaps, but close enough to feel like the universe leaving a note. He finishes in 1687. By then, he is older, changed, hollowed out by the intensity. But the work is there. A book that says the same rules govern an apple and a planet. A book that collapses the ancient separation between the corrupt world below and the perfect world above. And yet, even a book like this must pass through ordinary obstacles. The Royal Society is meant to publish it, but money is tight. A previous expensive book has drained their funds. It is almost absurd, this collision between cosmic law and mundane accounting. But this is how history often feels. The stars are measured, and then the printer asks for payment. Halley steps in. He pays the costs himself, out of a modest income. He oversees the printing. He corrects proofs. He handles the tired, smudged pages with care, as if he is holding something fragile. Newton, meanwhile, worries, not only about errors, about response. He knows there will be minds that do not like attraction across empty space. He knows the phrase, action at a distance, will sound to some like a return to a cult. Qualities. He knows theologians may find the mechanical elegance unsettling, as if the universe has been made too tidy, and the mathematics itself is forbidding. He is written in the style of classical geometry, partly out of caution, partly because he trusts it. The result is rigorous, but difficult. Only a handful of readers can follow every step. Still, the book exists. That alone feels like a kind of miracle. Pages bound, ink set, the thoughts he once kept secret now resting in other hands. Imagine the first copies, the smell of fresh paper, the stiff crack when the cover opens, the quiet sound of a finger sliding down a line of Latin. Newton does not celebrate in public. He does not throw a feast. He returns to his rooms and sits by the window as evening falls. The last light turns the stones of Cambridge soft gray. A draft slips in through a gap, carrying the faint scent of wet earth. He has done it. He has made a map of motion. And yet, in the hush, you can feel another shadow approaching. Because once a map is drawn, people argue over it. People fight over who held the pen first. People try to tear it, to redraw it, to claim it. The universe may be orderly, but human pride is not. So Newton sits with the candle and the dust, letting the silence settle again. He listens to his own breath. He tries to calm the part of him that expects harm. Outside, the world begins to speak his name more loudly. Inside, he tightens his grip on secrecy, even as he has opened his hands. The book has left the room. The room remains dim and safe for now. And somewhere in London, in a quieter street than the grand ones, Hallie is still watching the printing presses, listening to their rhythmic clatter like a distant mechanical tide. One work is finished. Another kind of work is about to begin. In those first weeks, the Principia does not roar into Europe. It moves the way water moves into dry soil, slowly, quietly, finding cracks. A copy travels in a satchel that smells of leather and rain. It rides in a cart where straw shifts under each jolt. It pauses on a tavern table for one careless moment, beside a pewter cup while the courier warms his hands near a fire. No one in the room knows what is in the satchel. No one guesses that inside are sentences that will outlast every voice in the tavern. In Cambridge, a fellow opens the book under a lamp and feels his eyes narrow at the first dense proposition. He reads a page. He reads it again. He scratches his chin, as if the hair there might help him think. He makes a note in the margin and then pauses, listening to the wind tap the window, because the wind feels easier than the mathematics. In London, Hallie visits the printer again, and the shop smells of oil, paper pulp, and ink. The press makes a steady sound, a heavy kiss and release. The workers move with blackened fingers and patient shoulders. When they lift a fresh sheet, the ink gleams wetly for a breath, then dulls as it dries. Hallie leans close, not touching, watching the letters settle into permanence. He knows each page is a kind of risk. One misprint could become an argument. One missing word could become a wound. And Newton, back in Cambridge, lies awake some nights with a strange feeling that he has pushed a door open in a house he cannot control. You know that feeling when you finally say something you have held back for years, and afterward the room seems to listen differently? He has that feeling, stretched into months. He goes to his table in the early hours, when the coals are dim and the air is cold enough to sting. He wraps his gown tighter. He lifts a candle and watches wax creep down the side. Slow as a sigh, he reads his own lines, checking them as if they were written by someone else. Sometimes he finds a place where he could have been clearer. Sometimes he finds a place where he was too bold. He corrects nothing, because the book has already gone out, and that is its own kind of helplessness. Some scholars will praise it. Some will fear it. Some will pretend not to understand it, because not understanding is safer than admitting it changes everything. And beneath all that, in the quiet spaces between letters and replies, there is the deeper truth Newton cannot quite name. He has described the pull, but he has not explained its cause. He has written the law, but not the mechanism. He can feel the question hovering like a moth near the flame. He does not swat it away. He simply sits there, letting it circle, because questions, he has learned, do not always need answers right away. Sometimes they only need a place to rest. Fame is a strange kind of weather. It does not arrive all at once. It gathers in pockets, then spreads, and suddenly you notice the air has changed. After the Principia, Newton's name begins to travel faster than his body ever did. Letters come from places he has never seen. They arrive, folded tight, sealed with wax, smelling faintly of smoke from distant hearths. Some are respectful, some are sharp, some pretend to be polite while hiding little barbs beneath their Latin. The book has given the world a new picture of the heavens, but it has also placed Newton in the center of a quiet storm. And the storm is not only about planets. There is a simple discomfort many people feel when they read about gravity. A pull that reaches across empty space, an influence without visible contact. To some, it feels too close to the old language of occult qualities. To others, it feels like a universe that can run without a hand on the wheel. Newton does not offer a comforting mechanism. He describes what can be measured. He gives mathematics where others want a story. Some scholars argue that this is exactly what science should be. Others insist that without a cause, a law is only a shadow. On the continent, skepticism lingers. Mechanical philosophy has its pride. It wants gears, pushes, collisions. It wants the world to make sense by touch. A brilliant mind there, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, raises objections that carry weight. He questions action at a distance. He doubts the sufficiency of attraction across nothingness. He wants the universe to be explained without invisible reaching. In another life, perhaps, these disagreements could have remained calm and fruitful. But human beings do not always handle brilliance with grace. And Newton, for all his understanding of the cosmos, has always carried a wound where trust should be. You can feel it in the way he reads the criticisms. He does not read them like puzzles. He reads them like threats. The dispute over gravity becomes tangled with another dispute, one that is quieter at first, then sharper. Calculus, or fluxions, as Newton calls it. Two versions of a powerful method, developed independently, expressed with different symbols, a tool that can measure change itself. Newton had found his approach earlier, in the plague years, and then kept it close, almost hidden. Leibniz developed his method later, but published it first. And now, the world asks a question that sounds simple and turns poisonous quickly. Who deserves the credit? National pride seeps in like damp. England leans toward Newton. Continental mathematicians lean toward Leibniz. Pamphlets appear. Letters grow hotter. Accusations begin to fly. And once they begin, they do not land gently. Newton tries, at first, to remain above it, or he tells himself he does. But the conflict scratches at the part of him that has always feared being robbed, being mocked, being made small. The same part that once wrote, as a child, a list of sins and included a terrifying wish to burn a house. He is not that child anymore, but the ember remains. When he becomes president of the Royal Society in 1703, he holds a new kind of power, a respectable power, a power wrapped in ceremony and titles and careful smiles. And he uses it, not with open shouting, with committees, with reports, with anonymous reviews that are not as anonymous as they pretend to be, with influence that moves like a slow current beneath a calm surface. He helps shape the official story. He helps push the weight of the institution in the direction he wants. It is one of the darker truths of his later life. The man who once hid from controversy now learns to manage it, to steer it, to hurt with paper and ink rather than fists. Honestly, I have always found it strange how quiet cruelty can be when it wears a scholarly robe. While these disputes grow, another change pulls him away from Cambridge. In 1696, he accepts a post as warden of the Royal Mint, a lucrative appointment meant to be mostly ceremonial. But Newton cannot do anything ceremonially. When he takes hold of a task, he grips it with the same intensity he once gave to prisms and orbits. He moves to London. The city is louder than Cambridge, heavier with people. The streets smell of coal smoke, horse sweat, wet wool. The Thames carries its slow gray breath past docks and warehouses, past cries, and creaking ropes. The Mint is not a quiet place. It is metal and heat and noise, hammers, furnaces, the sharp bite of new coins, a rhythm of work that is physical in a way Newton's Cambridge life never was. England is recoining. The currency has been clipped, shaved by thieves who steal slivers of silver, leaving the nation's money thin and dishonest. Counterfeiters move like shadows. They are not philosophers, but they have their own ingenuity, and it has harmed the country. Newton turns his attention to them. He interviews witnesses. He tracks patterns. He studies the small differences in metal and stamp. He walks through rooms that smell of sweat and hot iron, the air trembling with heat. He even goes, in time, to the courts. He watches men stand trembling under the gaze of law. He asks questions in a quiet voice, calm and persistent. He notes details that others miss. He is thorough. There is something eerie about it. The mind that measured the moon now measures lies. The hand that drew ellipses now signs warrants. He is not violent himself, but the system he serves can be, and he serves it with a cold devotion to order. At home, on St. Martin Street, his life looks polished. Better furniture, fine art, an extensive library. Visitors arrive, curious, respectful, hungry for a glimpse of the famous mind. He learns the rituals of London society, dinners, salons, conversations that circle around power and reputation. He speaks more than he used to. He smiles when needed. Yet there is still a private Newton inside the public. Newton, a man who prefers solitude, a man who trusts very few. His scientific creativity does not vanish, but it is squeezed. Administrative demands press on him. Controversies press on him. Social obligations press on him. The deep stillness he once used for discovery becomes rare, like a quiet room in a crowded house. Even so, he cannot stop refining what he has already built. A younger mathematician at Cambridge, Roger Coates, helps prepare a new edition of the Principia. Coates has the skill to follow the difficult lines, and also the patience to ask for clarity. Together, they smooth some rough edges, strengthen arguments, add new sections. The second edition appears in 1713, more complete, more confident. There are editions on lunar theory, on tides, on comets. The range is astonishing, like a lantern that has been turned toward more corners of the sky, and still, the universe refuses to be perfectly tidy. Observations reveal small discrepancies. A predicted motion is slightly off. A planet seems to wander, just a little. The moon's path shows subtle stubbornness. Critics seize these imperfections. They always do. They point and say, "See, the system is not final." They hope to pull the great structure down by its smallest cracks. Newton does not collapse. He calculates. He extends methods. He digs into the messy reality of multiple bodies, tugging at one, another. It is slow work, not the thrilling leap of insight, but the long grind of correction, page after page, numbers shrinking, margins filling, eyes aching. You can imagine him late at night, the room lit by a single candle, the flame leaning slightly with each draft. His hand moves steadily. The scratch of the quill is the loudest sound. The rest of the world is distant. There is a phrase that will cling to him in later years, a kind of shield. Hypotheses non fingo. I frame no hypotheses. A refusal to guess beyond what can be demonstrated. Some people hear it as arrogance. Some hear it as humility. Perhaps it is both. Perhaps it is a man trying to protect himself from the endless hunger of other minds. Because even as he refuses to speculate about the cause of gravity, he cannot stop wondering in private. The pull remains mysterious. The mechanism remains out of reach. The question circles. And while that question circles, other questions come to him from older places, from scripture, from prophecy. from the strange alchemical hope that matter itself might hide secrets. Newton has studied these things all along, quietly. Now, as years pass, they take up more room. He reads ancient texts in the hush of his study. He traces chronologies, counting years as if time were another orbit. He compares passages, looking for patterns, as he once looked for patterns in light. He is cautious. In England, certain theological conclusions can be dangerous. He keeps many writings private, locked away, shown only to a few trusted correspondents. It creates a strange split in his life. Publicly, he is the great rational philosopher. Privately, he is a man still searching for a coherence that can hold both law and mystery. You know that feeling when you can solve a problem in one room of your mind, but another room stays dark? Newton lives with that. As the decades move, he becomes not just a scientist, but an institution. People treat him like a monument while he is still breathing. Foreign scholars request audiences. Younger thinkers wait for his approval as if it were a stamp on their future. He receives them with varying patience, sometimes warmly, sometimes distracted, sometimes with the coolness of someone who has learned that admiration can turn into envy overnight. His body begins to complain. Kidney stones, digestive troubles, periods of fatigue that feel heavier than any argument. And there are moments, small and unsettling, when memory slips. A name takes longer to surface. A sentence loses its thread halfway through. He pauses, staring at the candle as if the flame could remind him what he meant. It is not constant, not yet, but it is enough to make the room feel colder. In the evenings, London's sounds drift in through the glass. A cart rattling, a distant shout, the soft wash of the river's presence. He sits among his papers, and dust settles on the corners of books. He begins, slowly, to think about what will remain when he is gone. Not only the published works, but the private pages, the manuscripts that carry dangerous theology, the notes that show the messy path behind the clean proofs. He has spent his life guarding his mind like a locked chest. Now the lock feels less reliable. Time has a way of testing every hinge. So he writes instructions. He organizes. He corrects. He tries to make the legacy stable. Outside, the city keeps breathing. Inside, the candle keeps shrinking. The flame is smaller, but still steady. And while the world continues to argue over credit and mechanisms and meaning, Newton remains at the center of it all, an old man with ink on his fingers, listening to the quiet pulse of his own uncertainty. There is still work ahead. Another edition, more visitors, more questions that will not lie down. And beyond that, the final stillness, waiting like a deep, calm room just past the last page. Sometimes a visitor arrives in the late afternoon, when the light is already tilting toward dusk. A knock, a servant's murmur, a name from France, from Germany, from Italy. Newton rises slowly. He adjusts his cuffs. He feels the stiffness in his joints, the faint complaint in his back. Then he enters the sitting room where the guest waits, hat in hand, eyes bright with expectation. The guest speaks of comets observed in a cold winter sky, of small errors in tables, of new techniques, new notations, new ways of shaping thought on paper. Newton listens, and for a moment the old fire returns in his gaze. He asks one careful question, then another. He tests the visitor's mind, the way he once tested prisms. Afterward, when the guest leaves, the house feels oddly hollow. The admiration lingers like smoke. He opens a window a little, letting in night air that smells of damp stone and distant river water. He breathes it in, slow, as if breathing could clear the room. Portraits are painted. Publishers circle. Biographical sketches begin to form while he is still alive, trying to freeze him into a single shape. He can feel the myth tightening around him, and myths, even flattering ones, can feel like cages. So he returns to the work, he can control. He turns again to the Principia, preparing what he wants to be his final statement, more polished, more careful. He adds notes. He strengthens demonstrations. He tries to leave fewer openings for careless minds. The third edition will come, and with it, a sense of closing. But the closing is not abrupt. It is gradual, like a candle nearing its end. And as the wick shortens, the room grows quieter. The disputes do not stop, but they move farther away, like voices down a long corridor. Newton sits at his desk and places his palm on the wood, feeling its cool solidity. He listens to the ticking clock. He watches dust drift through the candlelight, each speck turning slowly, as if time itself were visible. In that dim hush, you can sense the next chapter gathering. Not a new discovery, not a fresh argument, but the gentle approach of ending, a human ending, soft, inevitable. And if you were standing here with me, beside the fire, you might feel it too. The way the night deepens without forcing anything, simply becoming what it has always been meant to become. In the later years, Newton's house begins to feel like a quiet museum that is still alive. Not the kind with bright halls and loud school groups, but the kind you visit alone, where your footsteps sound too large and you find yourself breathing carefully, as if the air might be fragile. St. Martin Street carries the usual noises of London, carts and voices, the occasional call of a vendor, the soft slap of a horse's hoof on damp ground. Yet inside Newton's rooms, there is another climate, a hush, a controlled, candlelit world where paper waits and time moves in narrow lines. He rises earlier than he ought to, more from habit than strength. He sits wrapped in layers, feeling the chill creep in through the window frames. On the table, letters are stacked like small obligations, wax seals, foreign stamps, careful handwriting that leans slightly right or stands upright like a soldier. He opens one slowly. The crack of the seal is a small, clean sound. Inside, a young mathematician asks about a calculation. Another asks about a comet. Another speaks of a disagreement and wants Newton's name on their side. Newton reads with a patience that surprises those who once saw him as sharp and difficult. Age has softened one thing in him and hardened another. He has less energy for heat and more need for control. Sometimes his answer is only a few lines. Sometimes he drifts into a longer reply, as if the movement of thought itself warms him. The quill moves. Ink gathers at the tip, then releases. A sentence forms, then another. Then, in the middle of a thought, there is a pause. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and forget why you came? Newton experiences that now and then, and it bothers him more than any critic ever did. He stares at the page. His brow tightens. He listens to the clock, as if the ticking might help him recall the word that slipped away. Often it returns. Sometimes it does not. And in that small gap, you can sense the shadow of the ending. His body complains in louder ways. 2. Stones that bring pain. Digestive trouble that makes food seem like an enemy. Sleep comes in fragments. He wakes and sits in the dark, not frightened, just awake, as if his mind has forgotten how to close its eyes. When morning arrives, it arrives gently. A pale light, a thin mist outside, the city washed in gray. He watches it through the glass, and the world looks like it is made of ash and breath. There are visitors. They come with careful reverence, as if they are entering a chapel. French scholars who once argued against him now bow their heads. German philosophers who once questioned him now speak with respect, even while holding their doubts. Italian astronomers bring observations written in tidy columns, hoping to show him how closely the heavens obey his predictions. They sit in chairs that creak softly when they shift. They warm their hands near the fire. They speak in measured voices. Newton listens. He asks questions that are still sharp. He notices an inconsistency in a table. He points out an assumption hidden inside a phrase. He is still Newton, still precise, still unwilling to accept a convenient story, but he tires more quickly. After an hour, his face grows pale. His hand rests on the arm of the chair, fingers slightly curled, as if holding on. He ends the meeting politely. The visitor leaves with gratitude and a kind of awe that is almost heavy. Then the house falls quiet again. In that quiet, Newton turns inward. He has always been drawn to the idea that truth lies beneath surfaces, that a bright color is made of hidden parts, that a simple motion is made of invisible forces. Now he applies the same hunger to scripture and history. He spreads pages across the table, not the Principia now, but biblical passages, chronologies, notes in his own hand. He cross-references, he compares, he calculates dates. He searches for a pattern that will make time itself feel lawful. Some scholars argue his religious studies were as intense as his physics, and there is evidence in the sheer volume of paper, the countless pages covered in careful writing. Yet he keeps this side of himself hidden. He has learned what England does to those who speak too openly against doctrine, so he locks manuscripts away. He speaks of them only, to a few. He lives with secrets inside his own house, as if he is sharing space with silent companions. And still, the world outside continues to shape him into a symbol. Portraits multiply. Engravers carve his face into lines of black and white. Publishers speak of him as a prophet of reason. People who have never opened the Principia repeat his name like a charm. It is strange. He spent so much of his youth feeling unwanted, left behind, misunderstood. Now he is wanted by history itself, and it is not always comfortable. In the early 1720s, his decline becomes harder to ignore. Friends notice the pauses in his speech, the slight trembling of his hand, the way his gaze sometimes drifts, as if looking through the room and past it. Yet he remains a figure of authority. The Royal Society still seeks his guidance. Foreign letters still arrive. There is still a line of admirers. His days take on a careful rhythm. Morning for correspondence, afternoon for theology, evening for quiet revision, when he has the strength. Sometimes, at night, he walks slowly through his rooms. The boards creak under his slippers. He touches the spine of a book as he passes, as if greeting an old ally. He stops at a window and looks out at London. The city is never fully silent. Even late, there is the distant murmur of life, the river's presence, a faint hum, like the breathing of an animal too large to see. Newton stands there and thinks, not in dramatic speeches, but in small sensations. The cool glass, the ache in his side, the scent of candle smoke, the way dust settles on everything, even the most treasured objects. Dust is honest. It comes for all of us. It makes no argument. It only falls. As his health worsens, he begins to arrange his papers. He sorts. He labels. He writes instructions. The man who guarded his work now prepares to let it go. He worries, not about being forgotten, but about being misunderstood. He fears careless minds simplifying what should remain rigorous. He fears followers turning his careful restraint into dogma. He fears, too, that the private parts of him will be dragged into light without context, without gentleness, and yet he cannot control the future. He can only leave what he can. In the winter of 1726, turning into early 1727, the strain becomes too much. He grows weaker. His writing becomes shaky. He spends more time in bed. The sheets cool and heavy. Visitors are fewer, and those who come speak softly, as if volume could bruise him. The final days arrive without spectacle. He lies in a room that smells faintly of medicine and wax. A candle burns low on a table. Its flame is small, but steady. Friends sit nearby, their voices hushed. Someone adjusts the blanket at his shoulders. Someone offers water, and the cup trembles slightly. Newton's eyes open and close. When they open, there is still intelligence there, but it has become tired, like a lamp that has shone too long. He speaks in fragments, a memory of Cambridge, a mention of the plague years, the farmhouse, the silence that let his mind become vast, a brief comment about how strange it is that a life can feel like a single line, yet also like many separate rooms. Then, on the 20th of March 1727, he dies, quietly, peacefully, as accounts suggest. No struggle that needs describing, only the gentle ending of breath. For a moment, the city does not notice. The Thames keeps moving, carts still rattle, coins still clink, the sky still turns, but word spreads, and London begins to prepare something unusual. A man of science to be buried like a king. The decision to lay him in Westminster Abbey is not without controversy. Some wonder if a scholar belongs among monarchs. Some grumble in private, protective of tradition. Yet others understand that Newton altered the world's imagination, not by conquest, but by explanation. He taught the heavens to obey a language humans could learn. The funeral procession moves through London streets, and the streets are crowded. Imagine the sound of thousands of feet, not rushing, but pressing close. The murmur of voices like wind through reeds, the smell of damp coats and cold air. Nobles and commoners stand together. The Lord Chancellor serves as chief pallbearer, and dukes compete for the honor of carrying him. The Royal Society marches, robes dark and solemn. Inside the abbey, the air is cool and old. Stone holds centuries of breath. Candles flicker, and the light does not reach every corner. There is a museum hush, the kind that makes your own heartbeat feel too loud. Halley is there, older now, and grief softens him. He remembers the day he visited Newton with a question, and how casually the answer came. He weeps, openly, because sometimes the weight of a memory becomes too much for a single chest to carry. A eulogy is delivered. Words attempt to hold what cannot be held. No sentence can measure the whole mind of Isaac Newton. Yet the attempt is made, because humans cannot resist trying to name what they fear losing. When the service ends, the stone door closes, and the body is left in the cool dark. Above, life continues. Below, time deepens. A tomb is erected with sculptures that show allegorical figures of mathematics and astronomy mourning. Latin inscriptions speak of rejoicing that such a man lived. The language is reverent, almost religious. And that is the strange shift. Newton, who struggled with the thought of unseen forces, becomes an unseen force himself. A presence that pulls at generations. A name that shapes what others believe is possible. But as the candles burn down in Westminster Abbey, and dust begins its slow work on marble, another transformation begins. The man becomes a story, and stories, once released, never belong to their source again. They travel, they change, they settle in minds, and become something else. In the days after the funeral, the city breathes on, the river breathes on, and somewhere, in a quiet room, a young reader opens a book and feels the first tremor of a world becoming mathematical. The candlelight flickers, the page waits, and the night, patient as ever, continues to unfold. Honestly, I've always found it eerie how fame behaves like fog. It drifts in, it wraps around a person, it blurs their edges, and then everyone speaks as if they have touched the truth, even when they have only touched the mist. Newton feels that fog when the door opens and another visitor steps in, careful and reverent. A bow, a soft clearing of the throat, an instrument presented like an offering, brass cool as river stones. Newton turns it in his hand, listening with his fingers, metal, smooth from use, a hinge that resists, then yields. He gives a small nod, and the visitor holds that nod like a blessing. When he disagrees, He does it quietly now, not because his mind is less fierce, but because his body cannot afford anger. Anger burns too hot. He needs that heat for simpler things, for breath, for sleep, for the slow task of standing up. After they leave, the room widens. The chair creaks once, then settles. He sits alone with the fire and the papers. His concern for his manuscripts turns almost tender. He gathers pages into bundles, ties them with string, writes small labels, even as his letters begin to wobble. Mathematics, optics, chronology, questions he never dared to print. He pauses over the private papers, the theological ones. Some scholars argue he feared heresy charges, and whether that fear was sharp or dull, it was real enough to make him hide. So he seals those pages in a different way, not with wax, but with instruction. Delay. Time. Let the danger cool before strangers look. Outside, London keeps inventing itself. Coffee houses fill with argument. The mint keeps striking coins with steady rhythm. Value measured and remade again and again. In the final winter, he sits closer to the fire, light thinning across his face, a cup in his hands, a spoon that taps the rim, a small bright sound in a dim room. Friends mention new observations, slight discrepancies, the moon's stubborn complexity. For a moment, his eyes sharpen, and he asks for the numbers again. Then, the moment passes. He leans back. He lets the problem rest, not solved, just resting. Maybe that is the last lesson he offers, without meaning to. Even the greatest mind cannot force the universe to be simple. There is always a remainder, a small whisper left in the calculation. When the candle burns low, he watches it narrow and fade. No rush to replace it, just the slow dimming of light. And after, when Westminster Abbey receives him, the stone seems to drink the sound of the city. The crowd leaves. The doors close. Dust begins its quiet work on marble. Somewhere along the river, water moves under the bridges, dark and steady, carrying reflections like thin gold threads that break and rejoin. It carries time, and if you breathe with it, slowly, you can feel how a life becomes a layer, a thin line in deep history, not erased, not loud, simply placed and waiting for what comes next. The Abbey holds him, but his name does not stay still. Names are restless things. They slip under doors. They cross borders. They ride in pockets and libraries and conversations that begin with, "Have you heard?" In the weeks after the funeral, there is a strange quietness around his papers. So much of a life can fit inside boxes, bundles tied with string, loose pages that still smell faintly of ink and of the hands that turned them. Some are handled with care. Some are handled with hunger. Printers want editions. Scholars want access. Friends want to protect his reputation. Rivals, even after death, want to correct him or to claim they were close. And then there are ordinary readers, the ones who never met him, who simply feel the pull of the story. A premature infant who should have vanished. A boy left behind. A man who measured the sky. It is a dark kind of comfort, isn't it? That a life can begin in weakness and end in stone. The Principia, once understood by only a handful, begins to spread through translations and explanations. The hard geometry is softened into clearer language. The severe diagrams become simpler pictures. A strange transformation happens. What was once difficult becomes usable. In France, writers and thinkers seize upon Newton's mechanics as proof that human reason can illuminate almost anything. They speak of laws of nature, the way priests speak of divine order. Only now the altar is a desk, and the incense is paper dust. In Germany, philosophers weave his ideas into systems of knowledge. They admire his restraint, even as they debate the idea of attraction across empty space. They cannot stop asking the question Newton himself never fully stopped asking. How does gravity happen? What is the mechanism? Is it lawful? Yes. But why does it exist at all? In Italy, practical minds apply the new mathematics to engineering and navigation, bridges, canals, timekeeping. The world becomes a little more calculable and also a little more confident. And where confidence grows, shadows grow too. The influence of Newton's method spreads beyond the stars. If the heavens can be described in mathematical language, people begin to wonder if everything can. Markets, governments, even the human heart. Some of it becomes useful, even beautiful. A careful measurement can save a ship from running aground. A better map can bring a traveler home. A stronger bridge can carry people over water that used to separate them. But there is also a colder mood that slips in quietly. A belief that if something cannot be measured, it is not real. A belief that mystery is only temporary. A belief that humans are machines wearing faces. Newton's life becomes part of this argument, though he is not here to defend himself. In popular accounts, he is rewritten. The complicated man becomes a cleaner figure. The solitary thinker becomes a hero of pure reason. The theologian becomes an inconvenience, politely ignored. The alchemist becomes a rumor no one wants to repeat at dinner. It is debated, of course, how much of his private work should matter to his public legacy. Some say it proves he was not a cold mechanist at all, but a seeker who wanted unity between nature and scripture. Others say it shows the oddness of genius, how a mind can be brilliant in one direction and strangely vulnerable in another. We can't be sure how he would want to be remembered. He guarded himself too well, yet the myth grows anyway. Voltaire, who witnessed the funeral and felt the spectacle of it, carries the memory back to France like a lit candle. He writes of Newton as if describing a saint of reason. Readers believe him because they want to believe that truth can be found cleanly, without blood, without conquest, without cruelty. And still, there is a kind of cruelty in this myth too, a quiet one, the cruelty of simplifying a human being into a symbol. If you were standing here with me beside the fire, you might notice how that simplification happens in slow steps. First, a story is told. Then it is told again. Each telling sands off a rough edge, the way water smooths a stone. Eventually, the stone becomes pleasant to hold, but it no longer looks like the mountain it came from. Newton becomes pleasant to hold, but the real Newton, the one who listed sins as a child, the one who feared abandonment, the one who could not tolerate criticism, the one who kept secrets that could burn him, he stays in the darker archive, in private letters, in hesitations, in the places the myth does not visit. While the public story brightens, the technical work continues in deeper quiet. A new generation of mathematicians takes his tools and pushes them farther than he could have imagined. Leonhard Euler extends the mechanics into new territories, turning hard problems into flowing expressions. Joseph Louis Lagrange reformulates the principles with methods that are cleaner, more powerful, less tied to geometry. Pierre-Simon Laplace builds a vast celestial machine of calculation, predicting the motions of bodies with astonishing precision. The students surpass the teacher, as students always do, not by insulting him, but by using the very language he helped shape. In that way, his work becomes like a river. It begins as a spring in a farmhouse mind. Then it gathers tributaries. Then it flows through cities and universities and shipyards. Then it becomes part of the sea of ordinary life. Navigation improves. Timekeeping becomes more accurate. Engineering becomes more daring. Cannons become more precise, too. And that detail is rarely spoken softly, but it belongs here. Knowledge does not choose its uses. It simply arrives, and humans decide what to do with it. The world changes, and with each change, Newton's presence grows, even though his body rests in stone. Yet the greatest shift is not in machines, it is inside people's heads. Before Newton, the sky held omens. Comets were warnings. Eclipses, were messages. The universe felt like a mood, unpredictable and personal. After Newton, the sky begins to feel like a system, predictable, at least in principle, open to calculation, open to the patient mind. That is a kind of comfort. It turns fear into curiosity. It turns superstition into study. But it also creates a new kind of loneliness. If the universe is a clock, where does meaning live? If motion is law, where does freedom hide? If everything is predictable, why does grief still arrive like a storm? Newton's life hints at that loneliness. He unified the heavens and the earth with mathematics, but he did not unify his own inner world. He remained a man with wounds, with anger carefully disciplined into work, with friendships that were often strained, with a hunger for certainty that could never fully be satisfied. His own caution, his refusal to invent causes without proof, is sometimes quoted as if it were coldness. But I hear something else in it, a quiet humility, a refusal to pretend, a willingness to say, I don't know, and to let that not knowing be a kind of honesty. In his final years, when memory slipped and his body weakened, he showed another form of humility. He let the problem rest. He watched the candle burn down. He accepted that even a great mind must eventually lay its tools aside, and that acceptance is where we can rest too. Because you are not required to solve everything tonight. You are not required to explain your own. Gravity, the invisible pull of your thoughts, the way memories orbit and return. You can let the questions be questions. You can let the mind loosen its grip. If you listen, you might hear the room around you, the faint shifting of air, the soft creak of the house, the faraway sound of water, real or imagined, moving steadily through darkness. I like to picture the Abbey at night. No crowds, no speeches, just stone and shadow, candles long gone, but the scent of wax still living in the old wood, dust settling, grain by grain, like slow snow. Above that stone, the city sleeps. Above the city, the sky continues. Planets keep their paths, indifferent and faithful. And somewhere, perhaps, a young reader turns a page under lamplight, feeling that quiet thrill of understanding for the first time. This is how immortality actually works, not as a single bright flame, but as many small flames shared. A thought passed hand to hand, a method taught, then transformed. A question that refuses to die. Newton once said, in essence, that he felt like a child on the seashore, finding smooth pebbles, while the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before him. Whether he truly meant it in that exact phrasing is debated, but the feeling rings true. A lifetime of discovery, and still an ocean. Tonight, you do not need the ocean. You only need the shore, the slow tide, the calm repetition, the certainty that water can move for centuries without hurrying. So let your breathing become that tide, in and out. Let the jaw soften. Let the shoulders drop. Let the mind drift the way dust drifts in candlelight, turning and turning until it finally settles. There is another shadow that follows his legacy, and it is softer than war, but sharp in its own way, the shadow of ownership. Even after his death, people continued to argue about who invented what, who deserved the first claim, whose notation should be taught, whose name should sit closest to the throne of mathematics. The old calculus feud does not simply fade. It lingers like smoke in a room where the windows have been shut. Some defend Newton fiercely, saying he discovered early during the plague years, and that secrecy does not erase priority. Others defend Leibniz with equal fierceness, saying publication is part of discovery, that an idea locked away cannot help the world. National pride feeds it. England against the continent, continent against England, as if truth itself wore a flag. And somewhere in the middle is the quiet fact that both minds were extraordinary. Both created similar tools, and the universe did not pause to grant either of them exclusive permission. The planets kept moving. The tides kept rising. The math remained. I've always found that kind of dispute sad, not because credit is unimportant, but because it reveals how human even the highest intellect remains. We want certainty. We want clean stories. We want to place one name on the door and say, this is the owner. But knowledge is more like water than like property. It soaks, it spreads, it changes shape depending on the vessel that holds it. If you imagine the great libraries of Europe in the decades after Newton, you can almost hear that water moving. Pages turned in the early hours. Candles hiss softly when wax drips too close to the flame. A scholar's finger traces a line of Latin, then pauses, then traces again, as if repeating the motion might pull understanding closer. In one city, a student copies a diagram of orbits, the pencil scratching like a small insect. In another, a sailor listens to a navigator explain how a new table of calculations will keep them off hidden rocks. In another, an engineer stands beside a river and measures again, and imagines a bridge that will not fall. Tiny actions, quiet and patient. The kind of actions that build a civilization without announcing themselves. And still, there are rooms where the old fear remains. Rooms where someone whispers that the mechanical universe is too cold. Rooms where clergy worry that a law-bound cosmos leaves no space for grace. Rooms where philosophers argue, late into the night, voices low, because even argument can be intimate when it is shared in darkness. Some of them misunderstand Newton on purpose. Some misunderstand him by accident. Some read him like scripture, too certain, too eager. Others read him like a threat. Newton is not there to correct them. That absence becomes part of the story. The empty chair, the missing voice. This is another reason his funeral matters. It is not only an honor, it is a seal. A declaration that the state and the church and the institutions of learning will hold him up as an emblem. Yet emblems are heavy. They can crush the person they represent. So, when I think of Newton in deep time, I do not picture the grand tomb first. I picture the farmhouse again, a wooden floorboard that creaks, a cold window, a narrow beam of sunlight on a table, a prism turning that beam into color, a simple experiment. That becomes a doorway, and I picture the quiet, cost, the meals left untouched, the friendship strained by suspicion, the loneliness that can follow a mind that refuses to stop. Because that cost is part of the dark history here. Not gore, not battlefields, not screaming, just the slow thinning of a life into work. If you have ever stayed awake too long, chasing a thought, you know the feeling. The room grows unreal. The body becomes distant. The mind keeps running, even when it should rest. Newton lived much of his life inside that kind of wakefulness. It gave the world a new way to see. It also took from him things that cannot be calculated. And that is why, tonight, we can take the gentler part of his legacy. Not the harsh pride, not the feud, not the myth that demands perfection. Just the quiet invitation to observe, to test, to be honest about what you do not know, to let questions remain open without turning them into weapons. Now, let us return to the shore. And as you settle, remember that even the darkest parts of history can be held gently. A child abandoned can grow into a mind that reshapes the world. A mind that reshapes the world can still be fragile. A life can be brilliant and lonely at the same time. That is not a contradiction. It is simply human. The fire beside us grows quieter. The room grows warmer, then cooler. The night folds itself around the edges of everything. And somewhere, beyond stone and ink and time, the river keeps breathing. Slow, steady, patient. Good night.